Rob here at etrailer.com, and today you're going to be taking a look at the Roadmaster Crossbar-Style base plate kit with removable arms on our 2015 Chevrolet Silverado. Now keep in mind that's only one component of several that we're going to need for a full flat tow setup. The first one we're going to need is going to be our base plate. That's going to be the connection point on our car so we can safely tow it down the road. The next, we're going to need a tow bar. That's what's actually going to connect our base plate to the motorhome. We'll need safety cables, tow bar wiring, and finally a braking system. And one last final component I would recommend is the Roadmaster automatic battery disconnect, because we are going to be required to disconnect the battery when we flat tow our Silverado, but the automatic battery disconnect is just going to be us pushing a button rather than having to open the hood, get our tools out, and disconnect the cables. Now here's what our base plate's going to look like once we have it installed. Now we do have the crossbar and brackets pre-installed on our base plate because this is what it's going to look like once you go to hook up your tow bar. But if we remove it, we can remove the crossbar by pulling these two top pins and then removing it, and we can get a closer look. Now our base plate is going to give us that really solid attachment point so we can hook up to our motorhome and safely tow our Silverado down the road. But what I like about it the most is the fact that these arms are removable. We can come and find this pin and clip right here. If we remove the pin and clip, we can pull the whole arm out whenever we're not towing, and now we'll have a really clean look rather than have that large bracket on the front of our truck. Now you may be worried about getting dirt, debris, or anything inside that receiver tube on the front of your base plate here. Well, Roadmaster does have covers or plugs that we can plug up on the front of our truck and also help give it a nice clean look. Now on the outside of our base plate, we're going to have our safety chain connection point. It'll be a really convenient, easy spot to reach. And you can see we'll have plenty of room to get most size hooks on or off whenever we hook up our tow bar. Our Roadmaster base plate is going to work with quick disconnects and all Roadmaster tow bars. It is going to work with some other manufacturers' tow bars, however you are going to need an adapter that is sold separately, but you can find those here at etrailer.com. Whenever you're looking for a base plate for your Silverado, you may find a couple different options. One of them would be the Demco Classic base plate. Now that's a nice base plate, but compared to our Roadmaster, I really like this one more because the arms are removable, whereas on the Demco, they are going to be fixed arms and they're always going to be there. So here you can see our arms, they do stick out just a little bit past our bumper, but they take the place of our tow hooks, so they're not so noticeable. Those Demco tabs are going to stick out a little bit farther, and again, we can't pull them out. So to me, this just has a really nice, cleaner look to it. Now, as far as the installation goes, it is going to be pretty straightforward. Our base plate is specifically designed for our Silverado, so it's going to cut down on drilling. There's not going to be any kind of welding involved, but we are going to have to remove our bumper, the painted section above it, as well as the grill. But rest assured, it is something you can completely do in your driveway at home with just a basic set of tools. In fact, let's go ahead and walk through the installation together. To begin our installation, we want to come to the front of our Silverado, and right here in the corner of the fender well, we're going to be removing a few bolts so we can get this lower fascia section removed. So we'll have two bolts. We'll have one going towards the front of the fascia, right here at the edge, and we'll use a 7mm socket to pull it out. And then the other bolt is actually going to be going up right here at the edge where our fender meets the fascia. That's also going to be a 7mm head. Now that we have these two removed, we're going to go to the other side and remove the other ones as well. Now if we move underneath the front, if we look upward right to where our grill is up top here, if we go across the center, we're going to have these clips. Now these clips are what's holding the fascia in. So for now, what we can do is we can just kind of grab them, bend them down a little bit, make it easier for that lower section to come out. There's going to be a total of 6 of them. We'll have 4 right here where they're easily visible in the front, but we want to grab that clip, just pull it down a little bit so we can go to the outside and pull that section off. Now we're going to want to grab the corner of the painted section that's right below the grill, but it's above the chrome bumper. We'll grab that section and we want to start peeling it away. There's going to be some clips holding it in place. We're going to work our way towards the center until we can get the whole panel to come off. And And if you're having a little bit of trouble from those clips, what you can do is you can have somebody reach underneath and undo those clips while you're pulling out at the same time, because we don't want to break those clips on the back. Now, once you have the panel removed, you're going to want to set it aside where it won't get damaged. Now, with that painted section removed, it'll expose the area behind the grille. We're going to have 4 of these bolts, 1 on each end and then 2 in the center. We're going to pull these out, so we'll grab a 10mm socket, and you want to be extra careful not to drop them when you remove them. And we'll go along the bottom here and remove the other 3. Now, if we open up our hood, we'll have this plastic cover that's going to be covering up the radiator. We need to remove that, and if we look, we're going to have a lot of these plastic pushpin fasteners. Should be about 12 of them. We need to pull all of these out. Now, the way these are going to work, you'll see it has a little notch on the end here. I'm going to take a flat blade screwdriver or a trim panel tool. We're going to pop up the center section of our pushpin. That'll take the tension off, and then we'll be able to come underneath the base and pull the rest of it out. Now, we want to pull all of these push pins out so we can get the entire cover to come up. And with all of them removed, we'll lift up and we'll set our panel aside. Now, on each side of our latch mechanism, we're going to have 2 bolts that are holding the upper section of the grille to the core support. We need to pull all of those out, so we'll grab a 10mm socket and pull all 4 of those bolts out. Once you have all your bolts removed, we want to grab towards the center right by the latch, kind of lift upward a little bit and pull out. And that'll release a little bit of tension that's left on the grille. We should be able to pull it out, and we'll set this aside. Now, that'll expose the large bolt that's going to be on towards the outside of the grille. And then if we look towards the inside on the center, we'll have another bolt on each side. We need to remove these, so I'll grab an 18mm socket and we'll pull them out. Now, a quick tip, I'm going to remove the one on the inner side here that's a little bit harder to reach, but I'm still going to leave each side having this bolt in real loosely, because that's what's holding the bumper in place. That way I can get an extra set of hands and it's not so cumbersome trying to move the whole thing myself. Now, before we do pull our bumper off, if we look towards the passenger side right by the bolt we removed, we'll have this harness. We're going to disconnect everything so we don't cause any damage to the electrical system. We'll pull that red tab down, then you want to squeeze on that black tab and we can separate the 2 connectors. And it's alright if it came off the little clip that holds it onto the bumper. Give us a little better access to unplug it. And if you're having a little bit of trouble getting it disconnected, it's probably because it gets a lot of moisture and debris down here. So we'll get a flat blade screwdriver so we can press on the tab. If we move behind our bumper, we're going to find this support bar on the very edge. Now, our bumper is going to be tied in holding this bolt right here. So we want to pull it out. So we're going to grab a 15mm socket. And we're going to pull both out, 1 on each side. And one thing to note is we want to pay attention to the bar itself. We can see that the bar is actually sitting below the bumper, so when we put everything back in place, we want to pay attention to that. We'll go ahead and remove the other side bolt. Now, with an extra set of hands, we're going to remove that last bolt on each side holding the bumper in place. And we'll slide it off, making sure there's no more wires or anything connected, and we'll set it aside. So we'll start on our driver's side here. We'll have our factory tow hook, and we're going to have our bumper mounting plate. Now, this plate's going to be held on by 3 bolts. So we want to grab a 15mm socket and pull all 3 of those out. We're going to remove that, as well as the foam piece that's going around our tow hook. So we're going to need to remove our tow hook as well. Now, we'll have 1 bolt here that's going to be towards the front of our tow hook. That's going to go all the way through and actually have a nut on the other side. The one over here, it is not going to go all the way through. It just goes into a weld nut on the tow hook. So I'll take an 18mm socket, pull out this rear bolt. Then I'll use that same 18mm socket and hold the nut on the back side with the wrench and remove the forward bolt. With all of our hardware removed, we'll pull out our tow hook, and this is not going to get reinstalled. At this point, we want to grab our main receiver brace. Now, if we look at it, we'll notice on the opening, we'll have a square opening with a little tab. It's got a round hole on it. That wants to be faced towards the inside or towards the center. And then we'll have our safety chain loop right here. This needs to be pointing towards the outside. That way you know you have the side-specific bracket. Now we'll take the end that has this flat section with the nut on top. This is going to fit right into where we took our tow hook out. And we'll see that it's going to line up with those two holes on the side. So if we look at the bottom of where we slid our base plate in, we'll find a hole, and we can actually see that nut when I move it around. We're going to grab the large 5/8 bolt out of our kit, follow it up with a lock washer, and then the large plate washer. And before we get anything started, we want to make sure that all of our bolts are going to get at least a little bit of red Loctite on the threads. And we'll reach up, and right now we're just going to get this loosely started by hand. So our base plate will still have a little bit of movement, but it isn't going to round too much. Now if we look on the inside, we can see where our tow hook bolt holes were, and they are lining up with our base plate. So we're going to take one of the long bolts out of our kit, and we're going to grab the spacer, be shaped like this. We're going to run a bolt through our spacer, and again you want to put a little bit of Loctite on the threads. And we're going to be putting it through the furthest forward hole, so make sure it's lined up. We want to pass the bolt all the way through until it comes out on the other side. Once you have your bolt coming through, we'll take our end cap, little spacer, follow it up with a split lock washer, and then I'm just going to loosely install the hex nut just to help keep the base plate still so it doesn't move around quite as much, because we're going to use our base plate as a template to drill our other hole. So we want to drill through this hole because we already noticed that it doesn't go all the way through, but we want to have another bolt in place. So I'm going to take a somewhat small drill bit just to start the hole as a pilot hole. I'm going to drill all the way until it comes out the other side of the frame rail. But now that we have our hole drilled through the side and all the way through, I'm going to come back with a 1/2 inch drill bit and enlarge this hole to the final size. Now that we have our hole drilled and we verify that it goes through, put a little bit of Loctite on our bolt. We'll pivot our spacer into position, and we're going to use the same combination of hardware to secure everything down on the other side. And just make sure you pivot that spacer, that it's going through, the bolt's going through it, and then we'll put our lock washer and nut in place. And we're going to have one more attachment point. It's going to be down here on the bottom of our frame rail, and you can see that we don't have a hole going through there. So we want to grab our pilot bit, we're going to go through our base plate and drill out the back of the frame rail. So we'll start out with a small bit and then enlarge it to that final 1/2 inch. Then we'll take our shorter 1/2 inch bolt with some red Loctite on it, pass it through. Then on the back side, we'll slide this large plate washer over our bolt, and then we're going to secure it down using a lock washer and a hex nut. Again, we'll get everything loosely in place. Make sure it's all hand tight. Now that we have all of our hardware in place, I'm going to come back with a 15/16 socket, and I'm going to tighten up that large 5/8 bolt on the bottom. And for our 2 bolts going through the side, I'm going to be using a 3/4 inch socket and wrench to tighten up those bolts. And we'll use the same 3/4 inch socket to tighten up the bolt on the lower side. Now you want want to make sure you come back with a torque wrench and torque all your hardware down to the specified amount in the instructions. Now I'm going to go back and repeat that for all of my remaining hardware. Now we can grab our bumper bracket and reuse the factory hardware and just reinstall those 3 15mm bolts. Now I like to get them pretty close to where it was, just makes it easier to put the bumper back in place. So if you have the little marks from where the washers were, you can kind of hold it up, thread your bolts in and see where the washers land and get it as close as possible to where it was before. And we'll tighten them back down with a 15mm socket. And with this side of our base plate on, we're going to repeat that entire process over on the passenger side. Now with an extra set of hands, we're going to lift our bumper back up. You kind of want to guide your base plate through the tow hook openings and make sure everything goes back into place. And then once we have our holes lined up on top, we're going to take those factory bolts and just at least get one hand tight on each side, that we don't have to worry about our bumper falling off. Then we can start replacing all the fasteners and reversing everything we did in the beginning. And whenever you're going to put your bumper back in place, you want to remember to have this bar underneath that section here in the corner. Now a lot of times it's very difficult to get the bumper to act the correct way and to line everything up all at once. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come back following that bar farther. We'll find 2 15mm bolts. I'm going to loosen those up and remove them. I'm going to put the bar in the correct position and then just put everything back in place. So we'll just loosen everything up real loose by hand, move our bar, and then we're going to reattach it but loosely so we can make sure that the bumper is actually sitting properly, and then we'll put all of our hardware back in place. Now you can see once I loosen it up, I have plenty of room to get it back. So I'll take the factory bolt from underneath, line it up, get it real loosely started by hand. I'm going to leave this bolt loose and reinstall the other one, again, just real loose by hand. We'll move up top, make sure all of our bolts are lining up for our bumper. And once you have those bars lined up, it's going to make it a lot easier to get this inner bolt in, because the bumper will actually pivot a lot easier to line up if we have that bar in the correct position. Otherwise, we're just going to be fighting it, and it's probably not going to go back into place. Put all the panels back. In the painted section, you just want to make sure you line it up really well so we don't cause any damage when we try to get it back in. And with our push pin fasteners, we want to make sure that the top section is still poking out. And when we put them back in place, we'll push the base down all the way and then lock it down by pressing in that center section. But with all your bolts back in and everything's tight, that'll finish up your look and the install of the Roadmaster Crossbar-Style base plate on our 2015 Chevrolet Silverado. But we're going to continue hooking up all the rest of our parts so we can hook up to our motorhome and hit the road.